Thank you all for being here. I'm Wendy Goldberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Trifaith Initiative. And I would like to start by framing this conversation as Temple decided to frame their sacred space. And a decision about framing the sacred space at Temple was balanced in a conversation about whether we were focusing the message inward for a congregation or outward for greater good, and on the Hebrew text, and whether it was intended to wrap the congregation in a message or to be a message to the outside world. And ultimately, it was decided to use the prayer Hashkifenu, which is a message to be sheltered in peace. And the decision was that it's a square space and that half of the message was to be inward, to wrap us in a shelter of peace. And half of the Hebrew message was to the outside world, to both guard our coming and going and celebrate faith and God. And that was an external message. And I really believe that the conversation that we are intending to have here today is exemplified in that message. It is about us as the Trifaith Initiative coming together to wrap ourselves in a shelter of peace and to realize the work that we have to do to build trust and relationships in complex ways together, and to wrap ourselves in that to bring peace to each other and to live in harmony and be a model to the world in doing so. And also, to some extent, to realize that we're part of something much bigger, and that the work that we're doing in being a model is a way to guard our coming and going and to celebrate our faith and God. And so I hope that you are all coming here to witness what will be a complicated conversation, but that you come here with a frame to listen deeply, to hear something that you might not normally hear, to open yourself to more than one truth, and to see what might be possible because we come together to learn how to have this kind of conversation without resolution. I'm not looking for us today to solve any of these problems, but rather to hear really how Aryeh and I, after 30 years of building trust together, can hear each other in new ways, how we can explore a difficult conversation and model for everyone here how we might start to do that in more circles in the coming days and weeks and months and years. So thank you all for showing up. Showing up is the most important step. Rabbi Azriel, if I don't say it enough to you, thank you for your friendship, for your leadership, and for your vision. All these people who are here today are somewhat here because the word Palestine and Israel are in the title, but probably more because we have such a profound respect for your willingness to have complex conversations and to really intentionally listen with an open heart. And so the reason that I've asked you here is because I've learned so much from you in doing that. So thank you for being here today. Now that we've kind of set that intention, as you think about having difficult conversations and opening yourself as a rabbi, as a human being, what are the things that you keep in mind to balance your emotion and avoid fear to have those kind of conversations, Rabbi?
I think it's very important to come to this kind of conversation with open ears and an open heart. I think to be able to absorb what someone else will suggest, offer, the gifts of the people who participate in these dialogues, appreciate it, and be able to, from time to time, introduce maybe some new ideas, new vistas for the listeners or the participants. Courage, I think that if a clergy does not possess courage, then I think the mission is in doubt. And so, yeah, that's part of who I am. I think it started in a young age with some personal struggles and being able to overcome some physical issues and building up that content, that reservoir of courage to be able to address, to listen again, to respond to some of the challenges. I think we have definitely in the topics that you're going to bring today lots of challenges, and so I would like to start immediately with suggesting to never forgive and forget what each other as human beings are in need of doing. And this is the love and affection that we need to express toward each other.
Thank you. We come to the Trifaith relationships with different narratives and experiences, both personal and communal. How has Trifaith helped you to hear the voice of the religious other?
Wonderful. We have some participants today that definitely challenged me in the past and challenge me now in the present. And I have also constantly, despite the fact that I'm here in Omaha, Nebraska, listening to voices that come from Palestine and from Israel, and continue being very active in some organizations. So this is something that has always been on my mind. Actually, it started in a very young age when I grew up in Safat, in the north of the Galilee, in a house that was deserted by a Palestinian family. And so my family moved into this empty house that was owned and built by a Palestinian family. So from young age, that pain, that cry, in addition to what I experienced as a child and as an adult, till age 23, I experienced living in Israel. I came at age 23 to work in a Jewish summer camp in Wisconsin and never left. And I thank God for conducting my journey with great compassion and care.
How do you feel about the violence that's currently happening between Israel and the Palestinians and or Hamas, however you'd like to define that, and kind of tell maybe even about how you feel about any of those words?
Those are definitely words that keep me awake at night. Nights are a challenge in occupied territories. Nights are challenged in the state that I left. I am obsessed about trying to figure out what we can do here to try to ease some of the nightmares that we all have, continuing to have here in the United States, in this safe surrounding, in our common place. But nights are definitely distributed to the different people involved in the conflict, in trying to make the life of the other miserable and hard and difficult. If it's entering into homes in the occupied territories and waking up people at night and taking pictures of children and adults. And I'm also worried about missiles that land not far away from where my mother is. She is in an assisted living, and during the 11 days of ordeal between Hamas and Israel, my mother was taken 3 nights in a row to a shelter, waking up a woman who is 93 and confused and not aware where she is, and then spending the rest of the night in shelter. It's something that I did not predict or wish my mother to have.
What about the people who don't have a shelter?
It's a major difficulty. People who are open to all the difficulties that comes from above, bombs, cluster bombs, missiles, 440 of them that were shot at the Jewish population of Israel. But then I'm worried also about those other bombs that were dropped on buildings, on people, on camps, on youth locations, places for orphans in the Gaza Strip. There is enough reasons to stay awake at night, even when you're in America.
Can you define Zionism for us?
Zionism, for me, has always been a Jewish self-determination, but always with a caveat that there are other people living in the place that we dreamt about, giving it as a space for the Jewish people to have a country of their own. But I am totally aware that this is a serious conflict with two different liberation movements that are seeking the same territory. And this is what keeps the sleep away from me.
Tell me more about liberation movement.
The Jewish people for many, many generations, for thousands of years, were excluded from a safe place for the Jewish people. We always had a desire that started from the pages of the prayer book and from the history and the exiles from country after country, from terrible history that is very hard to teach to Jewish people. How can you teach constantly that your past and your present has been always in exile without ever arriving at a secure place? But at the same time, there is a need to acknowledge that this is a liberation movement that is in conflict, that should not be a conflict. There are definitely ways to resolve this conflict for other people too that are seeking exactly the same of what you were able to achieve. And this is something that is troubled me for a long time. Again, from the moment I discovered that my parents entered into a home of a Palestinian family and had to go to a refugee camp while my family and I grew up in a pretty comfortable, beautiful house in the northern part of Israel. So I actually was able to learn about this in an early stage of my life. I refused to accept some of the school books that never revealed to me what really happened in 48, 47, 48, 49. And I think I always wanted to restore those challenges, those difficulties for all those people to a situation where people are going to be able to survive in dignity, in peacefulness on their homeland. This is the difficulty of the conflict.
So when I hear people talk how you're talking, or is less common, more often it's binary. It's either Israel or Palestine. And the historical context of what are the 68 borders versus the multi-party system versus the wars and revisions to lines. Where are you navigating this kind of information next to your theology?
I really believe that I can have two opposing views at the same time in my mind. All, as the Talmud says, those and those are words of the living God. There can be a way of finding a compromise, of course, with first of all, maybe an attempt to apologize for whatever my ancestors did and what was done to us, understanding that there is a need for reconciliation. I would love to follow the model of South Africa of having a reconciliation committee to apologize for the difficulty that we cause each other in the Middle East, and then move on there and here to be able to talk about those things that happen without hiding anything under the carpet. I cannot believe that we can continue living next to each other or with each other in a relationship without acknowledging what was done to each of the groups in the past.
I think I'd like to deepen that and learn more about it. I think it's easy to listen to the news and read and say, I think they should. But if you're starting with yourself, can you tell us about a time that you've learned from or with a person on this topic that has opened you to see the pain from a different perspective?
Well, I cannot imagine anymore giving all the names of the people I met in Israel before I left. It was there. The stories were there. When you go and buy warm pitas early in the morning in Jaffa, the day after Passover was over, which was one of the rituals that my father and I have done every year after Passover for many years, and you speak to the people and you are mingling among the people of Jaffa, and you hear the stories from them. I was always open to hear the narrative of other people. I told you before that it started very early in my life when I was asking my parents, why are we in this house in Safed? And they, as immigrants that came from communist Bulgaria, revealed to me about how they received the key for that house. And so already from young age, I had something that was disturbing me. And it was like, a grain of truth that kept bothering me. And I think this is what really brought me to think about what I can continue doing away from the state of Israel here in Omaha, Nebraska. And I think this was the seed that helped me realize that something has to happen here. I was not able to do it in Israel, so I then invested the time and the energy with the help of so many people to come to the Trifaith realization. And I'm very proud of what we accomplish and what we're going to accomplish in the future. I am definitely not done. As long as God gives me a breath of life, I will continue working for that mission.
Okay, so let's talk about that. And as an adult citizen of the United States and the current conversation about dollars for military support going to Israel, Bernie Sanders, senator from Georgia, also both Jewish, suggesting that there be a revision in that policy. How do you feel about that?
The hypocrisy, I need to talk about the hypocrisy of the United States first. I mean, the money that they send to Israel helps us keep workers in America employed in creating cluster bombs and created all the difficult ammunitions and that kills other people. I think the Middle East have been used for a long time as a trying ground for both Russian and American and other countries' arsenal of ammunition to try this on people. And they caused havoc as a result of sending those kind of things, but keeping the factories open here in America. I think Israel is a country that really can sustain itself by the products that Israel is doing. I think that money is a small contribution, but so are the contributions to Egypt and Jordan and other countries in the Middle East. And those all go to keep factories in America open. And I think maybe we need to do some cleaning of the house here, making sure that the hypocrisy is stopped here. And I would not mind if that help can stop to all the countries in the Middle East by offering us money to buy all the ammunition and all the terrible bombs that are being created here.
So back to the conversation of, is this binary? When we start to unpack the support for Israel and for Zionism in particular, how do we couch the increase of anti-Semitism and the relationship between this intention and the language that is fueling anti-Semitism in North America and North American Jews questioning support of Israel, and then the definition of Zionisms that you proclaimed earlier. What suggestions do you have for all of us in terms of navigating those truths?
Well, first of all, I think it would be nice if we go into a session of prayer to the God above to try to guide us. But then I think that we need, my definition was a definition that allowed for two different organizations and movements of self-determination to live next to each other. I definitely am clear about the history of the state of Israel. I think there is room. I always believed in a two-state solutions, but with dignity to the other side, and not by only determining what kind of places the Palestinians will get. There was a time in my life when I was studying in Tel Aviv University where I joined a woman by the name of Ruth Dayan. She was Moshe Dayan's wife, and we went to visit villages in the Galilee and other Arab villages, and I learned a lot from those conversations. I think it's important to, I think this idea of having now an Arab party for the first time in the coalition in Israel brought me to ask questions. Why wasn't there an offer in 1948 by David Ben-Gurion to the Arab to join the government there? I don't understand this blindness. I think it is possible at the end of this conversation, I'm going to be called anti-Zionist, and I will be carrying that with an honor because I don't think I'm offering a solution to the annihilation of the Israeli state. I think it should stay there. It's took a long time to be able to have a place that we thought it will be a haven, but it turned to be really the opposite of a haven. It's one of the most dangerous places in the world is to live in the Middle East. It's not a good neighborhood. But I will always fight for the rights of the people who live in Israel to have a state, both the Palestinians and the Jews there. Both of them deserve, because of their historical roots with the region, to continue living there. but the living has to be done in peaceful way. It has to be done in accommodating each other, in being able to offer love to each other, and not just to have nightmares coming from there.
Thank you. I'd like to point out to those who are watching two things that just happened in this conversation. One is that Rabbi Azriel spoke to his blind spot. And the second is he talked to lengthening. And lengthening is understanding the long game. And I think those are really important framing for having a complex conversation. And I just want to point those out as we all learn how to do that better, that those are skills that we're looking to replicate. I'll repeat them. One is to notice your own blind spots. And the second is to look at lengthening. Lengthening requires focusing on not just the immediate consequences, but in looking at the impact over time. And so thank you for modeling that for us. You started to speak to the end of the reign of the Netanyahu government. I'm sorry, Rabbi Azriel, could you repeat your blind spot? That was a question in the chat historically.
Maybe you can define this for all of us.
The blind spot is what you didn't recognize in some of your first passes through the conversation. So what you're saying is your ability to see in the first recognition of the establishment of the government that there wasn't an Arab presence, and that over time you learned that that was something that should have been reconsidered.
Yeah, mistakes started at the beginning, even before the establishment of the State of Israel, many years before.
So now in the reformation of the government, what hope does that bring you? What questions does that ask for you?
I hope that the government will last for at least 1 year. I doubt if there will be no mines that they will have to dismantle. It seems to me a very strange coalition with parties that are opposing each other. There are 8 parties that came together to form a coalition. I believe that some people there really believe in the message of doing it. I think some other people have to grow into this coalition. They have to mature and be able to talk to each other in a kind and nice way. I think the difficulty, I recognize the difficulty of the Arab party that joined the coalition. They took a huge risk. I think also some of the Jewish parties in the coalition took a very, very important risks. But, you know, I pray, I hope, I will support them. I will talk about them. I will try to understand. You know, I read so many magazines and newspapers every day. I'm trying to understand what will happen. I don't think they know what will happen yet. We'll see what happens. We should pray for the success of that government. It's definitely a better government than the one that we had before.
Tell me more about why you believe that.
Because I am aware of some of the people that are in the coalition. I'm aware of the intentions, the importance. It was definitely a coalition that gathered together because they mainly opposed the leadership of Netanyahu. That's what unites them. Now they have to discover what else unites them. And I think there are definitely topics that will bring them together if they continue talking about this. But I'm not naive to not be aware that at every moment of this government, I think they are being sustained by artificial means. I'm very worried about the survival of this patient. At this moment, it's a very shaky government. We need to pray for the success of this government and to support them, even if it sometimes will be hard to support them 100%.
How have you come to know the relationship of the reform movement and its impact on this conversation when you speak to your clergy friends and colleagues, Trua and other organizations that are calling for the end of oppression? How is that relating to this government and the situation?
Well, it's actually easy because although they have a prime minister that is wearing a kippah, he is an Orthodox Jew, and they have some other Orthodox Jews in the coalition, I still feel that what the previous 12 years of Netanyahu did to the freedom of religion in Israel, I need to keep all of you aware that in Israel, there is no separation between church and state. Sorry, not a church, but between Orthodox Judaism and the state. My movement, my ability to function as a Reform rabbi in Israel was established very early in my life when I became a rabbi and my sister was planning to enter into the chuppah, into the marriage contract. And she said to the rabbi officiating, who was Orthodox, can my brother participate in the wedding? He said, what kind of a rabbi is he? And she, of course, told the truth. He's a liberal, reform, progressive rabbi. And he said, no, of course not. And so there is definitely oppressed minority, liberal minority in Israel that cannot have their own funerals, cannot have their own rabbis, are excluded from some of the most intimate religious rites. So that's where I learned this. So my movement is constantly fighting for the freedom of religion in Israel. Israel was supposed to be a place for people to practice their own religious feelings and rituals, and it really did not happen. Did not happen for a long time, and it started with the establishment of the State of Israel. Although it's written in the Declaration of Independence, it was never practiced. So the Reform movement definitely is in the right place in trying to fight for that freedom.
So in one of my trips to Israel, we had a lot of conversation about democracy in Israel and the shifting demographics and whether all have the right to vote. How do you see that playing out with this government, and who has the right to vote? Who will have the right to vote? How will we how can we advocate for improvements in that category?
Definitely, there is no democracy in the occupied territories. The occupied territories, people are not allowed to vote, except, of course, if they are Jews and they live in settlements in the occupied territory. Yeah, there are definitely groups of people that are not allowed to vote, and I think this should become definitely a topic for us to learn more and expend more time in trying to find out how we can do it. But of course, there is a problem with this. You have territories in Israel where people, Palestinians, are allowed to vote. Then Do you extend your ownership of those territories? So there are a lot of issues that need to be brought up first before we go on a campaign to fight for voting. I don't think voting is the only issue that is problematic. There are also budgets that are not given to some groups of people to make themselves less vulnerable. There are other issues in addition to voting. Human rights. We need to extend human rights in some of the places that we are occupying.
So, Aryeh, we have such a mess here in Omaha, Nebraska. Like, let's talk about human rights, redlining, reconciliation,
Well, we done
oppressed people. Why does the Trifaith Initiative need to take on this thing happening in another country if we haven't even cleaned up our own backyard?
Who said that we cannot do both things at the same time? Come on. We can do both things. We can do a lot more things. We're not limited to one or two things. Why? Why? Because I think that the true Trifaith will happen when everything is discussed. And I think there is a problem that I'm sure some people on the line remember, that we only so many years later, we're having this conversation. And I thank you for allowing me to express myself. But this is a conversation that the imam and I wanted to have a long time ago. Am I right?
Tell me why you want to have the conversation with the imam.
Why? Because he's fascinating, because I love him as a brother, because our relationship and the dreams that we have are really combined dreams of what we can do. And I'm sure those dreams are also the dreams of the clergy at the church. We still have to talk about those difficult issues. We have to talk about the difficult text in our traditions. We had a text that was offered to us in Anna's presentation just a few nights ago that is challenging. And we need to talk about this. We need to talk about parts of the Bible that if I had a choice, I would love to eliminate them from the Bible because they still are bringing nightmare to me and to others. There are places in other texts that we hold sacred that needs to be discussed to a greater extent.
What do you hope an outcome of having that conversation in front of other people? I know you and Imam Jamal have deepened your relationship to each other through having these conversations, but why publicly?
The question is, why not? And also, if not now, when? When are we going to be able to talk about those topics? I think those topics can enrich. We don't have to look at them as obstacles. I think the more we talk about them, the more we talk about, for example, the promise of Abraham by God, the more we look at the text and check the words, we see that that blessing was to all of humanity, not only to Isaac and not only to Ishmael. Those have to be discussed. Those have to be opened up, unpacked. There's so much work that we need to do. That's why I'm with short sleeves. I'm ready to constantly roll my sleeves and get into the text and try to, with the help of other clergy, with the help of other scholars, to be able to bring those difficult texts to our existence. They're there.
So you mentioned other thought leaders who we might bring. What other skills would people need to consider gaining in order to not just have an emotional conversation to headlines, but actually to be able to dig in and be adequately prepared with the historical context and understanding of the government and all of these pieces. How might a person start to prepare themselves for that?
We prepare again by asking God for wisdom, and then accepting the notion that it is possible none of us will solve anything in the Middle East, but we can sharpening the understanding between us, and that's important. So we need patience. We need to be able to ask forgiveness from each other for what our politics have done to each other, not our religion. I think our religion is not the source for the disturbances that take place between us. It's about politicians and politics. The religions are still pretty much embracing us in warmth and love, and we just need to understand more about each other religious route to where we are. Why? We need to have all the right ingredients to have a compassionate conversation, loving each other and being able to speak to each other out of love. Love exists in the core of each religion. And I think this is what needs to be practiced by us. Just because we build buildings next to each other, bricks don't love each other. It's hearts of people that are going to love each other and understand each other.
Thank you. So after I wrote the statement about not making a statement and learning how to have complex conversations, I've heard from a few people who I invited to join us today to also give a little bit of feedback. The first, Abu Bakr, I was wondering if you could perhaps unmute yourself. Abu Bakr and I have had, Abu Bakr is a member of AMI. We've had a number of email exchanges and a beautiful hour conversation. Abu Bakr, can you tell me how you're feeling about this conversation, about my words, inviting Aryeh, how you're feeling today?
Assalamu alaikum. Hi, everyone. I'm really glad, Wendy, that, first of all, we had, the conversation that we had a few weeks ago, and I'm also happy that, you are having this, Zoom meeting with Rabbi Azriel for us to be able to get to know or get to understand, the violence that is, going on in between Israel and Palestine. I think, this is a hard time for Trifaith, and I pointed out to Wendy that, I don't want to be in her shoes right now, as we're talking. And, to be honest, I think this is the time where, as the rabbi said, where we need to unpack, we need to have a conversation, we need to maybe scale down on our personal feelings and have thoughtful conversations that will bring peace and justice. And I believe that, without justice, or, each party feel like, justice is being sought by the two parties, it's hard to reach peace. So hearing, the rabbi, and after, my conversation with Wendy, there are a few points that I just wanted to also add. I'm not a historian, I have no knowledge about, the history of the conflict, and, and I'm not really following that really well, but, my common sense, just teaches me that, when you hear, in the media, or you see videos of, people claiming that, hey, if I don't steal your house, somebody else will come and steal it. Or, if you hear that, relatives, people here that have relatives in Palestine or Israel, calling them and having the background, bombs and, shooting and it's normal. I think here in the United States, our hearts need to be moved, and that's what moved my heart to get engaged into the conversation, not to blame each other, but to come to a position where we can sit and have a thoughtful conversation for the long run, just like Wendy said, because, pointing the fingers at each other, I don't think, would help us, attain peace. But at the same time, we have to be able to define justice, which is, calling wrong. If here in the United States, somebody comes to my neighbor and say, if I don't steal your house, somebody else will come in and steal it, I will call it wrong. And if I can call it wrong in the United States, I think, I should be able to call it wrong anywhere else in the world, just to be fair and just. The other point also that I think, Trifaith, maybe can help us, carry the flag is to be able to, call out violence in any places of worship. Here, we call out violence, when it happens, in mosques, synagogues, churches. And I think if we do it here, and then, same thing happen, in Al-Aqsa, we should be able to call out, any violence in places of worship. So those are a few things that I just wanted to add. But, again, I'm really grateful to be part of the conversation today. And I'm really happy and very excited to hear what Rabbi Azriel is saying. And I think that maybe there are a few others in the group that have seen their name that can maybe add some thoughts and personal opinions to make the conversation balance. I'm glad that we have Rabbi Azriel there, but maybe if we can have maybe some thoughts and wisdom from people that are original from Palestine, I think that would also help us balance the conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to publicly thank you, Abu Bakr, for your compassion. I think it's important for everyone to know that I have heard from him in multiple ways, in multiple times. And an example is first to talk about whether or not we're opening the container of the conversation wide enough. And second, to hold true to the statement that he made about multiple truths. As he learned of an increase in anti-Semitism, his willingness to reach out to me and acknowledge the pain of that, separate from whatever else was happening in the world and pain that my family might feel as a result of that. And I think that common humanity begs us to open ourselves to how this in every reality impacts different people who are heard or seen in different ways. And this is a really beautiful way for us to think about how many complex conversations there are out there. Another person that I heard from in the last weeks of this kind of conversation in a different voice is Susan Petrie. And Susan is the mother of 6. New to Omaha, a member of Countryside Church. And I think it's important for us to realize that while this conversation impacts our Jewish and Muslim partners, it also impacts our Christian partners. And I was wondering, Susan, if you could tell this group a little bit about your response to the email that I sent and your thoughts even on today.
Sure, thank you. So right, I am a mom to 6 youngish kids, 13 and under. And so my primary job, as I see it, is to raise them and raise them well. And after I read your email, Wendy, I had some thoughts. Basically, the situation was so overwhelming to me. It's like, what can I do? And Rabbi, I think you said it, we can't solve it tomorrow, today. But when it was so overwhelming to me, I just thought about, well, I need to look at my kids, because they're the ones. I think, Wendy, you framed it as lengthening. And I started to think, this is my way of lengthening my work, is through them. And so I didn't have all those thoughts when I went to show them a video. It was a YouTube video, which is what they tend to like these days. So it was of a 10-year-old girl. I believe she was a Palestinian girl, just talking about the violence and the war. And it just was pure from her heart. And I knew my kids would identify with that. So Wendy's email just prompted me to have that conversation with my kids, because it's not a conversation we typically have, quite honestly, at our table. But I felt it was important that they understand what's going on. And if they heard it from another child that's much like them, frankly, much like them, that, you know, it would resonate with them. So I guess, again, I look at this conversation as just intriguing. It's not even a word. I'm not finding the right word to me. Certainly, I'm a student. I'm not a scholar of this. So I'm here to learn and to listen and to share what I can. But again, going back to my kids, I just feel like that's the way that I think I could make an impact. An impact is through them, because they are the future. So thank you, Wendy, for inviting me. And I really, really have enjoyed what I've heard so far. And enjoyed isn't the right word either, but well, it is. I've enjoyed hearing, but it's much more than that. So thank you.
Imam Jamal, I acknowledge that this was not a discussion. It wasn't intended to be a discussion. And it's not intended to fix or finish anything. It is an opening. So we haven't been brave enough to talk about this in Trifaith Initiative programming. And I admit, I set a container that I felt brave and safe enough to have as a day one. The conversation is years in the making, 15 years that we have chosen to say that we were focusing on building what we have here. We've completed our mission to co-locate. Our next intention is to build inclusive environments to advance interfaith relationships and understanding. And in doing so, we not only need to just have a conversation, we need to prepare to have a conversation. And so this was an opening. I've put a link in the chat to your feedback. I hope your feedback includes ideas for what you would like to know in order to have these conversations. I hope you consider putting August 19th on your list, because this is one of many conversations that are complicated. So on August 19th, I'll be having a public conversation with Pastor Tracy Perry from the church about white Christian nationalism. It's another really hard one. And we have a lot of work to do on this and other topics. If you want to be part of those conversations, we're going to have a series of crucial conversations where we set a container for you to start to talk to each other about these topics with us. And I am so grateful that you all showed up today. Rabbi, thank you.
Thank you.
Any last words?
Yeah, patience, patience, patience.
Are you telling us or yourself?
Myself.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.
More soon. Thank you all for showing up.
Thank you, Wendy. This was really good. This was really one of the finest, if not the finest, and it was a complicated and, tough and, topic that I'm sure that, we will talk about a lot but Rabbi, you put your heart and soul, and you are a real man who talks exactly what he thinks and straight from the heart. And I just wish, coming from Abdul Maki, that many in my community, many in my part of the world will dare to talk like you just did. And that's what, we are missing in this equation. So God bless you. And I know why I like you, Rabbi, is because my grandmother came from your same village of Sapad. So thank you and shalom. Thanks.
Shalom. Shalom.
Thank you all. Have a nice afternoon.